This, as I said, this is the 51st Palm Sunday message that I've had the honor of preparing in my ministry season. The most difficult thing is to take familiar passages and to approach them as though you've never seen them before. But that was the effort that I exerted for today. I just wanted the story to tell itself from the text. It's so familiar. So as children, we colored these pictures in our Sunday school classes. The images of this text are indelibly chiseled in our memory. The chanting that echoes continually in our ears. The crowds incessantly waving their palm branches, and the patchwork quilt red carpet that led them to the city. The unrestrained cheering voices of children, the passionate chanting of the desperate yet expecting. And it's the weeping king on a humble Uber. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Save now, save now. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied, and a colt is with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." Now, this took place in order to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Zechariah 9:9. "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you. He's humble. He's mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and they did as Jesus had directed them, and they brought the donkey and the colt, and they put their cloaks on, and he sat upon them. Now, most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds went before him, and that followed him were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus, the Nazareth from Galilee." I try to imagine what it would look like with all of our cell phones available. What kind of postings would have been on X and on Instagram and on Facebook and all of the others. It was a flash mob that suddenly appeared. It wasn't like an orchestrated, organized, high-dollar, paid-for gathering of bustian celebrants, but it was simply a spontaneous joining of a mob. It was an unorganized riot in contemporary terms. It was a mass demonstration that began slowly and swelled until it swept over the entire city. But when you think about it, if you were there, you would say after the fact, "Wow, look at the landscape destruction that took place. Without permission, they broke off branches from my favorite tree in my front yard. Their coats, those they sleep under. This is like they've got to have it at night. This is their comfort from the world. And many of those are pilgrims, and so they especially needed it to sleep that night. Yet they threw them down like a graduating class, tossing their hats in the air, and the people were going through after the fact and going, "Oh, the donkey did his thing on mine. Well, that's not mine. That's yours. I'll take this one." I mean, it's like all of that chaos would have shown up in social media. What they could not have understood was the heavy cloud that hung over Jesus. It was spontaneous to them. It was intentionally calculated and executed by him. He had a burden on his heart that no one could see and no one could share. The battle lines had been clearly drawn. After 3 years of itinerant ministry, including stunning miracles, unprecedented healings, and breathtaking messages, after one poking the bear confrontation after another, the national leaders had determined that he must be erased. On more than one occasion, they had plotted his demise only to be upstaged time and again. And now there was a further complication. 4 days post-funeral, there was a formerly deceased man living well among an adoring people. Instead of strategizing a single death, they were now faced with the need for a double murder. In this particular situation, a lesser man would have simply soaked up all of the praise and accolades. He would have immersed himself in the applause and the approval of the masses. The greatest contrast I could come up with was King Nebuchadnezzar standing in Daniel 4, looking at his city and saying, "Wow, look at this great city that you yourself have built." And he threw his arm out of joint, patting himself on the back. A lesser man would have seized the fever pitch of the moment, utilized it for self-promotion. The interesting thing about this event is that it is the greatest week in the history of humanity. No other 7-day period in history has or will compare to it. All 4 of the gospel writers recorded it. And so at risk of boring you with repetitive reading, I want to read all the remaining accounts. Mark chapter 11. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany, which is about a 4,000 steps on your Fitbit over the hill from Jerusalem, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' the Lord has need of it," is your answer, then they will send it back immediately. So they went, they found a colt tied at a door outside the street, and they untied it. And some of the standing there said, "What are you doing untying the colt?" And they told them that Jesus had said to them, and so they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus, they threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." And he entered Jerusalem, and he went in to the temple. The book of Luke, chapter 19. Verse 28. When he had said these things, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. And when he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent 2 disciples and said, "Now go into the village, and in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you say to them, 'The Lord has need of it.'" So those who were sent went, and they found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners said to them, Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. As he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." There's a little flashback to Christmas. And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." And he said, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. And they will tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." John chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there, and Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. And Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment from the pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii, 300 days' wages, and given to the poor?" And he said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone, that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you will not always have me." And when a large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus had come there, they came not only on account of him, but also they wanted to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well. Because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. And the next day, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, so they took branches of palm trees, and they went out to meet him, crying, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And Jesus found a young donkey, and he sat on it, just as it was written in Zechariah 9:9. "Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had done to him. And the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. And the reason why the crowd went to meet him was that they had heard that he had done this sign. So the Pharisees said to one another, "You see that you are gaining nothing. Look, the whole world has gone after him." Now among those who went to worship the feast were Greeks. So they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and they said, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Holy Week. The interesting thing about it is if you read the Gospels, 35% of the account of the life of Jesus is consumed with the last week of his life. Of the 89 chapters in the Gospels, 27 of them concentrate on this. Why? Because it is the most significant week in human history. Now, this is kind of how the calendar of the week unfolded. On Saturday, the day before the triumphal entry, was the day of the anointing. Mary washed his feet as an act of preparation for burial and worship. On Sunday, there was the experience of the triumphal entry. On Monday came the cleansing of his Father's house, which they had made a den of thieves. On Tuesday, there was great conflict with the religious leaders, the influencers. This is the day that he pronounced the woes against them. Woe are you, woe are you. And he's not speaking as a cowboy for Vacation Bible School. On Wednesday, things are pretty quiet. But then Thursday is the Passover, the Last Supper. The one where the photographer said, if you all wanted a picture, line up on the other side of the table. It was the night of the kiss of death. And then Friday is the cross and the tomb. Saturday, silent sorrow. Spoiler alert, Sunday is a day of victory. Death could not keep him. The grave could not hold him. And Satan could not defeat him. But that's going further in the story than we're supposed to go. As you read the four accounts, you discover that there are a supporting cast that God divinely brings to the scene to color it and to give it context. We have the story of Lazarus. Simply by his presence is a testimony to the life-giving power of this promised king. He had raised him 4 days dead from the tomb, and people, having seen that, are celebrating. You remember in Luke chapter 16 when the rich man awakened in Hades and he looked across the chasm and he asked that Abraham would send Lazarus to dip the finger in the water to cool the tip of his tongue, a man who wouldn't give him the breadcrumbs off his tablecloth. And he said, if you would send someone back from the grave, then my 5 brothers would believe. And Abraham said, they've got the scriptures. If they won't believe Moses and the writings, they wouldn't believe even if one came back from the grave. And there is the resurrected Lazarus walking among them. And not very long after that, their Hosanna, Hosanna would turn to crucify, crucify. And there's Martha, always graciously serving. Linda has a special place in her heart for Martha. Martha has always taken the hits for working in the kitchen. But she said, when they're done with Jesus' Bible study, the guys were more than happy to eat the sandwiches that she had prepared. And then there's Mary, always passionately worshiping at his feet. And Judas, the selfish embezzler, judging the motives of others simply because he probably perceives that those would be his motives. And then the Jews, the ones that he had come to redeem, the one in whose family line he had been born, are actively plotting 2 murders now and not one. And then the people, this pent-up expectation of generations finally finding expression in the perhaps this is the long-awaited Messiah. And of course, the donkey. He just humbly serving. Never had a saddle on him, never had anybody sit on his back. My dad bought us a Shetland pony when we were in elementary school. He thought it'd be good for us to learn how to break a colt. It wasn't long and the colt had broken us. You don't just climb on unridden donkeys. And yet, the donkey humbly carried him. It's just like an unpaid-for Uber making his way into the city. And the disciples, they've been following him for 3 years. They've been eyewitnesses to the great miracles, to the power over death. They've seen resurrections before. They've heard the great preaching. They've seen how the people just soak it up. When Jesus opens his mouth to speak, they're in awe. And they say, no one has ever taught us like that. And finally, after 3 years, the people get it. And they're thinking, maybe this is the day we're awarded our 12 thrones. And the Greeks. This is a great Passover week, and they are from foreign lands, but they come because they have a God-fearing heart, and they've heard much about this Messiah, but they've never met him. And so they say, we'd like to see Jesus. And then the historic context. It says in Galatians, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. In the fullness of time. So in this time, the Greeks have already conquered the world. You don't need a history lesson, but you understand. And then following that was the Roman conquering, taking over, laying out the road so the gospel could spread quickly through all of those things. But the Romans were a battle people. They were warriors. They were fighters. And so when a great commander would return from a successful battle, they would throw what they called a triumph. It's kind of like the Super Bowl champions going home the next day. It's ticker tape parades and celebrations, and for one day at least, they own the city. So a returning triumphal commander would be given the king for a day recognition. He was carried into the city by 4 horses drawing a golden chariot, wearing the crown of royalty and the robe of dignity. He was revered on that day as though he were deity. The spotlight was always on the victorious commander and not on those things around him. He was momentarily elevated above every other citizen in the kingdom. And at the end, the booty that was captured in the battle was generously gifted to faithful warriors. That's why it says in Ephesians 4, and he took captives, and he gave gifts to men. And then finally, the day would end with a grand banquet to be shared by those who were closest in relationship to the commander. This is Jesus' supposed triumphal entry. The award for victory. They had no idea what battle yet lay ahead. At that moment they cried, Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. So again, this is not like a sermon. This is just old man musings after 51 years of exposure to the same stories. I suddenly realized that there were three perspectives or three directives of this Jesus that rode in. The first one is the people saw him as a king. You ask the question and say, so how? That was where I started. In fact, Nick and I were talking about this morning. I was working on 1 Kings, or I was on Psalm 2. Why did the kings of the earth push back against him? But that kind of led. So they think that he's a king, but how is it that could erupt with such fervor? And it's because of the long narrative in the nation of Israel related to a king. The first king, as you know, was Saul. 1 Samuel. He was the people's choice. He was chosen because they wanted a king like the other nations. The book of Judges closes with, and there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which is right in his own eyes. And it was a season of absolute, total chaos. And so they said, we want a king like everybody else has. We need some orders. We need some protection. We need some leadership around here. But the problem with Saul is he proved that human leadership, apart from God, will always fall short. So the second one is the covenant king, David. He was a man after God's own heart. He's the one that God says that I will always have a descendant of yours to rule upon your throne. And yet even a great king leaves us longing for a greater king. Toward the end of his reign, 70,000 innocent people lose their life because David went out and wanted to know, what's the strength of my military forces? It was an ego trip, and even his commander said, don't do that. And he insisted on doing it. So right when you think we've got the ultimate king, he leaves us wanting more. And then his son Solomon, the king of a divided heart. The king who, when he became a king, he said, Lord, God said to him, ask whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And he didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for fame, he didn't ask for a Jaguar, he didn't ask for a Porsche. He said, just give me wisdom. I'm like a child. Give me wisdom so that I will know how to lead your people. He wrote some of the most amazing scriptures. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. He talked about moral purity and uprightness. You can't read Proverbs. You're in 7 chapters, and there's just one warning after the other about women who have no morality and avoid that. And then he marries multiple women of foreign ancestry, and they turned his heart against the Lord. Suddenly you realize that a wisdom known yet unapplied will always lead to failure. And so there was the golden era of the nation, and yet it crashed and crumbled because of the failure of a king. And then that introduces us to the season when Israel and Judah are divided. You didn't come here this morning for Old Testament walkthrough, did you? But anyway, they're a divided nation. And Israel, in the north of 10 tribes, they have 19 kings. You can read it. It's in your book. And not one of 19 walked with God. But regrettably, Judah, the favored tribe, had 20, and of them, only 8 walked with God. There was always this expectation, anticipation that the solution to our problem is in a king. When we have a king, we will have peace, prosperity, joy, freedom, and they always failed. And then Jesus. The psalmist wrote, Psalm 110, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. After 400 years of silence from heaven, the silence was broken by the cry of a baby, and 33 years later, the people say, now that's the kind of king we've been waiting for. So he was the prophesied king according to the Davidic covenant. He was born as a king according to the story of Bethlehem and the wise men. He was praised as a king in John chapter 6 when he fed the multitudes with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He was executed as a king when Pilate nailed a sign overhead, the King of the Jews. And yet, according to Philippians chapter 2, the Father exalted him as a king. And one day, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. But regrettably, most people will bow with their arm twisted behind their back. They'll be forced to do so. But according to Revelation, he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. On this day, the people saw him coming, and they saw a king. But the second thing that you see is that he came as a shepherd. He came with a heart for his people. But along that, it's interesting that Luke's the one that says, and when he saw the city, rather than rejoice and celebrate, he saw them like sheep without a shepherd. And his heart was crushed. And it says he wept. And that word for wept is the same one that was used in the grave when Lazarus was raised from the dead. It said he wept. And literally, he sobbed uncontrollably. So while everybody else is celebrating that the king has come, the shepherd of the nation was brokenhearted for his lost people. Psalm 78. It starts the story with David. It says, I called David from the sheepfolds to shepherd my people Israel. And he did it with a skillful hand and a pure heart. Hand and heart in harmony. A great shepherd. In Isaiah chapter 40, he says that he shepherds his people. He is both tough and tender. So he's able to fight off the threats against them, but at the same time, he's able to take a little lamb and hold him gently to his bosom. In Ezekiel 34, he reproves the leaders, the movers, the shakers of the Jewish culture because he said, you are failed shepherds. You, rather than protect the flock, you have fleeced the flock. Rather than see to their needs, you have embezzled from them. You have stolen for your own good. And God's answer to them was, one day I will raise up a good shepherd, and he will look for the lost, and he will heal the lame, and he will nurture the weak. Psalm 23 summarizes it by saying, the Lord, he is my shepherd. And Jesus picked up on that in John chapter 10. And he said to his disciples, I myself, I am the shepherd. It's interesting, the structure there. I am the shepherd, the good one. I am the shepherd prophesied in Ezekiel 34. I am that shepherd. As Jesus entered the city and they're expecting him to take on the robe and the crown, he comes in as a shepherd with a broken heart for the desperate need of his people. But the third one is the most intriguing, and we get it later in the week. So this is again a spoiler alert. He entered as a lamb. According to Josephus, as Jesus was approaching the city from the Mount of Olives on the east side, at the sheep gate, they had begun on Sunday, which was the ritual, to bring in the sacrificial lambs for the week of the Passover. They had to bring them in early so that they could examine them to determine whether they were without spot or blemish, whether they were acceptable lambs to offer themselves in the place of those who offered them up. According to Josephus, there were 253,000 sheep brought into Jerusalem. Now, one author I read said that the Levitical priesthood would have only been able, working full-time and as hard as they could, to have offered sacrifice of 18,000. But every family was responsible to have an approved lamb. The family would have to sacrifice their own lamb The 18 would have the blood applied on the altar. The others would apply the blood to their tent or whatever, but they celebrated the fact that it was through the shed blood and applied blood of the lamb that they were delivered from captivity in Egypt. He entered as a lamb. According to Corinthians, he was the Passover lamb. He was our redemption. He paid the price for our debt, for our enslavement, to set us free. He was also the sin offering lamb. His shed blood covered the sins that we had committed in violation against he and his Father's righteousness. And he was also the scapegoat lamb. So the sins of the people were named as the priest put his hands on the scapegoat. They had tossed it, they had rolled the dice, they'd flipped the coin. So this one's going to be sacrificed on the altar, bloodshed, consumed by the fire. This one's going to be led out into the wilderness and set free. But before that was done, the priest would lay his hands on his head, and with a loud voice, he would recite the law and the failures of the people. What a horribly miserable congregation that must have been. It's like, oh, gee, I didn't think anybody knew. Oh, that one too? Okay, thank goodness he's a scapegoat. Scapegoat's going to remove my sins as far as the east is from the west. He's also the Lamb who will sit on the throne. Revelation 7. Therefore, they were before the throne of God. They serve him day and night in his temple. He who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more. They will thirst no longer. The sun will not strike them, nor the scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne, he will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Probably the most popular published writer is a man by the name of Anonymous, however you pronounce it, who once wrote, he was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter shop till he was 30. And then for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family or owned a house. He didn't go to college. He never visited a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place where he was born. He did none of these things. One usually associates with greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. He was turned over to his enemies, and he went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on this earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 20 centuries have come and gone. Today, he is the central figure of the human history. All the armies that ever marched, all the navies that ever sailed, all the parliaments that ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned, put them all together, they have never affected the life of man on earth as much as this one solitary life. Because he chose the way of the cross, not the path of comfort. He celebrated his victory before the final round. He forced the hands of his opponents to nail him to the cross. He accepted the crown of thorns before receiving the crown of glory. He surrendered to the stone-cold tomb. He didn't buy it. He only needed to borrow it for the weekend. He wrenched the grip and the sting of death from the enemy's hands. He killed death by turning it into life and bondage into liberty. He set captives free. He covered shame with robes of righteousness. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness. He has transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. The tear-stained King. Hebrews 5:7 says, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. He wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He wept at the view of the city of Jerusalem. He wept in the Garden of Gethsemane. At the grave, he weeps with us. Over a city, he weeps for us. In a garden, he weeps instead of us. In the words of Charles Spurgeon, a Jesus who never wept could never wipe away my tears. But the story continues. Think of that.